Today, talking with Dr Kylie King, who's a research fellow in the Centre of Health Policy Programs and Economics in the School of Population from the University of Melbourne. She was one of the advisors on a documentary called Man Up that's looking at men, masculinity and suicide rates in Australia. We'll cut in about a minute into the interview due to technical difficulties, so just keep that in mind. Enjoy.
Okay, life can be crazy. You're feeling like you're sinking, just trying to find a meaning. It's time for better thinking, yeah, better thinking. Time to tune in. Let's go.
The conversation about men, masculinity, and suicide is a exceptionally important and topic to be discussed here in Australia, in particular with what the stats go out and say, and we'll go more into that in a moment. So, just like to thank and welcome Dr. Kylie King for coming on.
Thank you. No, it's a pleasure to talk to you. I look forward to the discussion.
Fantastic. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the documentary and how it all kind of came about and your role in it.
Okay, well, I could talk for a long time about all of that. I'll try to give you a brief version. But I'm a research fellow here at the Centre for Mental Health in School of Population and Global Health at Melbourne Uni, and I work with Professor Jane Purkis and other colleagues. And so we worked on a Movember-funded project, actually, that worked to develop the Man Up documentary with a film production company called RS Films. So we worked with them and provided them, I suppose, the academic support and evidence-based sort of rigour around the documentary. And they did the creative part of it. All credit to them for developing such a beautiful and entertaining product on a very sensitive topic. And then we at the university undertook a big evaluation of the whole Man Up project. So there was a documentary that went on the ABC, and it was also surrounded by a social media campaign on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and Tumblr and various other places. And so that preceded the documentary by a couple of months and went beyond it as well. So we evaluated the entire Man Up project. So a big part of that was the randomised control trial that we did. So before the documentary went to air, we met with about 350 men, and about half of them viewed the documentary and the other half viewed a different documentary. And then we assessed those men before and after to see what the impact on people that view the documentary was. And then we also did an evaluation of Facebook and Twitter content as well. And I'm trying to think now, we did a few things. There was a website on the survey and we evaluated that. We also did a paper that looked at the development of the website and the appropriateness of materials on the website for men. So we did a whole bunch of stuff, but I guess the randomised control trial was really the centrepiece of the evaluation.
Fantastic. And just to make sure that our listeners also understand what the Man Up project was about and in terms of the documentary. So it's a three-part documentary, and please jump in at any time wherever I get this wrong, that really explored suicidality among men. One of the big stats that came that sort of brings us to the forefront is that the number one cause of death for Australian men aged between 15 and 44 years of age is suicide. And so this is a real important and immensely important topic, for men. And this sort of aired on the ABC's broadcast to I suppose bring about awareness for men and likewise I imagine women as well to go out and support men to be able to talk about or begin to discuss or to seek help and find a better means to deal with what men deal with and hopefully prevent or reduce the number of suicides that we have each year.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description. So, it came off, there was another study being undertaken in the school that was the 10 to Men longitudinal study of male health. So, we were very interested in and concerned, as you say, about the higher rate of suicide amongst men in Australia and globally, in fact, in many other countries. And the Movember Foundation were very concerned about that as well. So that's what the project grew out of. And then we started thinking about, well, what is it about men that place them at higher risk for this for suicide? And so we started to think about what that might be. And there's a lot of theories put forward as to why the suicide rate is higher amongst men. But it seems that perhaps masculinity, so the way that boys and men are raised, I suppose, and the rules by which they're expected to live by, but perhaps that was having a negative impact on men around suicide. And there is quite a bit of research that tells us that conformity to some of those more harmful aspects of masculinity, like self-reliance and stoicism, do have negative effects on mental health outcomes and suicidal thinking. So we went in with that knowledge, and Man Up was created as a way to. So it's narrated by Gus Warland, who is a radio personality in Sydney and becoming increasingly nationally known for other activities such as this. And he, it was a documentary. It was his journey, I suppose, and he was inspired by the loss of a friend of his to suicide. And so he was inspired to also find out what that was all about. And he started also taking the viewer on this journey through masculinity and how that expressed in Australian culture and what the limitations and impacts that might be on Australian men and boys, and particularly in relation to suicide.
Yeah, it's a fascinating documentary, particularly from, if I just speak from myself, being a man and having grown up and experienced, a lot of what Gus spoke about, with regards to, what is it that defines, manliness or being a man, and, how does the modern man, what are the expectations? And I think he did an exceptional job in going out and interviewing men in very, very different environments, whether it be rural, who have got their own unique set of challenges, with particularly isolation and what it means to be a man out there. Versus, someone who might be, how do you define yourself as a man in a city? Whether it be a metrosexual or they had a whole bunch of terms that I can't even remember now, but keep quite hilarious, all the way through to, hearing from, military personnel who have come, home from, serving, and, how embedded their identity has been with, that strong masculine, persona, and what it's like for, all those groups, and groups that I haven't mentioned to be vulnerable in speaking up or discussing, their feelings. It's not something that we do very well in Australia as men. Yeah.
It was fascinating, wasn't it? And I loved, there was that section in there with where Tom Harkin went into a boys' school and did a workshop with teenage boys, talking about, what is a man, and, what are the rules that men live by, and who made these rules anyway. And it was just so incredibly powerful. And I was really blown away by how much masculinity was something very central in these boys' lives as well. That we think perhaps that we're evolving out of it, but it's alive and well. And it was, really eye-opening, I thought, in lots of ways. And then I suppose a big emphasis of the Man Up documentary too was about sort of normalising, as you're saying, like normalising these experiences for a whole broad range of men, and also encouraging men to reach out and, help each other out and listen to their mates and get help if needed. Just really, and we did the one of the studies we looked at. We asked some of the people that viewed the study some open-ended questions about the impact of viewing on them, and a lot of participants, a lot of men that viewed the documentary told us, like, oh wow, I didn't realise that other people felt this way. I thought it was just me. And a real kind of eye opener for a lot of people that, wow, there's a lot of people feel just like me. So yeah, it was really very impressive. Might be a little bit biased, but that's how I felt.
No, absolutely. That was my impression as well in watching the documentary, and in particular the responses that a lot of men had were, very much around what I'm going through is what I'm going through, and everyone else is in a different, situation, and so I am isolated and I'm alone in this, and on that basis I am weak because the others are doing quite okay. It's just me.
Yes, yeah, so true, isn't it? But in fact, everybody's got their own stuff going on.
Absolutely, and I think some of the staggering statistics that come out of this, and I think they've been fairly stable for some time. That men account for approximately 75% of all suicides. That's staggering. That's three quarters of suicides, but belong to men. Completion of suicide belongs to men. That's staggering.
Yeah, it's just awful, isn't it, really, when you think about it?
Did anything from the research sort of look at why there's that distinction between 75 versus the 25 for the female counterparts?
Oh, it's not something that we explored in this research particularly. Like, we were more interested in the impact of Man Up on people that saw it and were associated with the media campaign. So we didn't look at that explicitly. But I mean, there is a lot of thinking about that and a lot of research about that, because a lot of people obviously are asking this question as well in an effort to try to prevent those deaths. So it's not something that we looked at, but I could talk about, I suppose, other research.
Well, I'm definitely quite interested to hear about your research in terms of what was found in does a documentary like this make a difference? I think for all of us, we're in that same boat. I imagine where we all have friends, loved ones, colleagues that we might see that they might be having some hard times and are there things that we can do? Does awareness help? In terms of this project in particular. When I watched it, I thought to myself, encouraging men to be more open and to be willing to be vulnerable is such an important piece of the puzzle, and it doesn't need to be publicly open. It could be just sitting down with a mate, having a beer and having a chat at the bar, or it could be having a fish with a mate. It could be telling a loved one, a spouse. Could be opening up in any way, even if it's not necessarily related to this is what I'm going through. Just encouraging emotional expression rather than that stoic. So, did the research sort of look at were men's attitudes changed by watching the documentary, and obviously the whole campaign attached to it?
We did look at that, and we found when we did the trial, which was a study where we split men into two groups, and half of them watched Men Up and half of them didn't. We assessed them on a range of measures, so a range of questionnaires that have been used in other research. So that means we can be fairly confident that they measure what they say they're going to measure, and we can compare them with other studies. So we looked at two of the key things that we looked at were help seeking, so men's the degree to which they said that they would be likely to ask for help or recommend that someone else sought help. And we found a change in that. So we found that men that viewed Man Up were more likely, after watching Man Up, to say that they would seek help if they needed to for a personal or emotional problem, or they would recommend, as you say, reaching out, recommend that a male or female friend seek help. So, yeah, there was a significant impact on that for men that viewed the documentary. We also found a small, significant reduction in the amount. There was a measure in there called the Conformity to Masculine Norms Inventory, which is a bit of an awkward term, but it's about how much the degree to which people sort of subscribe to those traditional masculine norms of, stoicism, self-reliance and whatnot. And we also found that men that viewed the documentary showed a small decrease in that as well. So, it certainly did. And then, as I said before, we asked also for people's comments. So afterwards, in our survey of participants after they watched the documentary, they were able to provide some open-ended feedback to us. So we asked questions about how Man Up had impacted on them. And a lot of participants told us about how they were now feeling more comfortable to reach out to other people, either for support for themselves or to support other people. And they told us about ways they'd actually done that. So they might say, like, people said things like, oh, now I'll make sure I'll ask that mate another question, and I won't just accept the yeah, I'm fine answer. And then, other guys also told us how, oh, yeah, I've had a few more in-depth conversations than I'd normally have. I've been asking more questions. Or people told us about times that I knew my brother was going through a tough time, so I gave him a call. So, as you say, it's not always about reaching out to professional support, although, when that's needed, that's important. But a lot of what people told us was about just being more noticing of what was going on for the men around them, and being sure to ask those extra questions, and also to just be more open themselves about what they were going through. So we certainly found that, and that's a really big finding because, like I said earlier, self-reliance, so, relying on yourself to cope with life's difficulties and not reaching out for help, has been shown to be linked to suicidal thinking. So so the converse of that, reaching out for help and offering help to others, is absolutely a very positive thing, I think, when it comes to suicide prevention.
Yeah, look, that's absolutely huge, and it actually triggers something in my mind, which is about how we go about in our community, to around supporting each other. And I know through my training, one thing that stood out very early on in my career was this conversation around suicidality, and the issue there that we often find is that a human being response is very quick to avoid awkwardness, and so we don't like conversation that feels awkward or odd or uncomfortable. And so we'll often reach out, and we might reach out to a friend and say something like, hey mate, how you going? And we expect that somehow in code is interpreted as, "How you going, mate? I'm worried for you and I'm concerned. Is there anything that's bothering you that you'd like to share?" Which is a very different, conversation, and that plays out in my training in terms of when we ask around suicidality, we don't go out and beat around the bush and say, "Oh, have you been having any dark thoughts?" Because dark thoughts does not address it. You've got to be straight down the line, and it's still in a very compassionate and kind and thoughtful and patient way. But the the question would be more like, have you been having any thoughts of harming yourself, killing yourself, uh, or taking your own life? It has to be very direct so that there's no ambiguity, because human beings will very easily go out and avoid. And so that's really fascinating how you've linked that, that self reliance, meaning I won't go out and tell anyone, but at the same time maybe we as a community can be a bit more direct with asking the question. I think that's what Gus did amazingly. The host of the documentary, I think he did that amazingly by asking the hard questions.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And very often people are very happy to answer them. But I think that comes back to what we were saying before about what the documentary did too, was raising awareness. So I think sometimes people don't talk because they think everybody else is, life's sweet for everybody else, and then, so I think, that kind of awareness that actually other people might be going through stuff that you don't know about makes it easier for you to talk up as well, so yeah, I think that's really important too. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, we're the Australian culture is a, she'll be right, mate culture, isn't it? Like, how you going? Yeah, I'm fine. It's just how we talk. But yeah,
Absolutely, and particularly, I think there were lots of parallels sort of discussed in terms of, how that self-reliance in particular looks in our rural, Australian world, where the "she'll be right" attitude, and you know, f- almost being derogatory towards, if you are having any emotions, you're weak, or a pussy, or a coward, or whatever it might be, kind of like this looking down at, versus when the conversation is tabled, people are genuinely looking out for each other and they're genuinely concerned for each other. They're just not approaching it. They're not hitting it, front on, where we're kind of mocking it.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think the men in our study who viewed Man Up, like there was a kind of sense when you're reading the comments of a great relief, like, oh, other people feel like me, and a really strong desire to want to do something about that. I think the will is there, and people want it, but you need something to sort of kickstart it, I guess, don't you? And hopefully that's what Man Up did. It kind of opened it up and kickstarted something.
Yeah, yeah. I think that word of relief is a real important one. It kind of says that others have been feeling this, and it's a relief that it's finally tabled. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think so. There was a lot of comments like that in the comments that we had from people that viewed the documentary that was saying, I didn't realise people felt like this, and you got the sense that that was a huge relief for people to realise that they weren't the only ones that, struggled sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. What was it like being so close to it, and being able to kind of see the participants, or maybe you can tell us a little bit about how the study run? Was it a questionnaire that was provided towards the end? Did it look at post behaviour? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, I suppose we were a bit removed from participants, actually. We met with them in the beginning. We invited people to come and take part in the study, and we had a really great response. We didn't tell them that it was about Man Up. We said it was just a study about men's well-being, which was a bit vague, but we didn't want to give away what we were trying to find out and bias people. So men came along and met with us in groups of about 20, and we actually gave them an iPad each, and they completed the questionnaire on the iPad.
And was that after watching all 3 episodes?
No, that was before. So we wanted people to fill out the questionnaire before. So that questionnaire was about it included that measure of help seeking, intent, the likelihood they would seek help. So they answered that question. There were questions about masculinity, so so how much they agreed with statements about masculine norms, like about self-reliance and coping and that kind of thing. And we asked questions about suicidal thinking, of course, and we asked questions about, we had a measure of resilience, so people's coping. Can't remember now all of the questions. Oh, and we had a measure of well-being as well, and psychological distress. So we asked all these things at the beginning of everybody, and then after they filled that completed that questionnaire on the iPad, then they were signed up for our study. And so then what we did is they were randomly selected to watch either the Man Up documentary or another documentary, which was completely unrelated. And they got an email sent to them with a link to those documentaries, which they watched at home or wherever they wanted to. So the other documentary was a National Geographic Test Your Brain documentary, which was about memory and concentration, completely unrelated. But the idea was to give the people that weren't watching Man Up, they needed to still be part of a study. So that way, when you do that, and a control group, so any differences that you've groups, and you can be pretty confident was because of the documentary that they watched, the conditions they were in. So, so the participants went home and watched the documentary online, so they could just do that in their own time. So this was before it was on television, so they got to see it before everybody else. Then just after viewing, there was a survey link on the website where they viewed the documentary, and that asked for their just immediate impressions of the documentary. So what did you think about it? What bits did you like? What bits didn't you like? And whatnot. And then 4 weeks later, so we wanted to give them some time to, digest it and process it and, have a think about it. And we emailed them a link to another survey. So this survey was a repeat of the survey that they received before they viewed the Man Up documentary. So it was the same survey, so that way we could compare their responses before and after. And then at that stage, we also asked them some more in-depth questions where they could type out answers so they could tell us some more information about the other impacts that the documentary had on their life. So again, asking them about, what bits did they like, what bits didn't they like, how did it positively or negatively affect their life. So, so that was how the study was designed. And then we had about, what was it again, 149, I think it was, yes, in each group. So we will be able to compare the two groups for their responses. So we looked at the differences in those measures over time, so comparing before and after, and then comparing the two groups. And that's how we could discover that the men who watched the Man Up documentary showed changes in their attitudes towards help seeking and attitudes towards masculinity that the group that didn't watch Man Up didn't show. Did that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. Was there any moderating effect in terms of, if someone had, higher sort of masculine views, whether it changed it more or less, or it was just looking at it, per, control versus experimental group?
Yeah, we just compared the two groups. We didn't really have the numbers to be able to do that sort of analysis. So that sort of analysis requires a bigger group of participants. So we would have loved to do that, and we had fantasies of doing that, but we didn't get to do it. But I think that is absolutely would absolutely further our understanding even more if we could do that. And we did have questions about that, like what would happen to somebody that was, had really high scores on the masculinity scale. How would they be impacted versus somebody that was lower scored, or how might their resilience affect the impact that it had on them or their well-being? It'd be great to know all of that, and that I suppose that's part of a bigger study, because this sort of research is really in its early stages. I guess there's been a lot of work done about masculinity and its various impacts on different outcomes, but there hasn't been a lot of work looking at how you can change it, and and as you say, the impacts that the moderating or mediating effects it might have on other processes. So there's not actually a lot known about how all of that happens. This is pretty kind of early stage research, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it always raises lots of other questions that come from this space, and obviously, early research. That's why it's there, to pose other questions. Were there particular recommendations that potentially came from this, or anything that you considered? Even though it's early stages and more research needs to be done. Are there any sort of guides, directions that you would like to see in how could public policy look different, or how could we as a community, how could I as a brother go out and help a family member or a friend? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think the big finding was that these things can be changed. That big sort of population-wide interventions like this, for want of a better word, like they do have an impact, and that men are sort of ready for change, like the documentary tackled quite a sensitive topic, and on a broad scale in the media. So I think it was really exciting to be able to demonstrate that something like that could have a positive impact on men's, desires to seek help and help others, and also on their own thoughts about masculinity. So that was a really exciting finding, and as I said, that's probably one of the first time something like that's been demonstrated on that scale. So I just think that just speaks to the need to probably continue working in this space, because it does have positive impacts.
I thought it was really fascinating to watch how many masculine norms, traditional masculine norms were um, uh, for lack of a better word, questioned. Not necessarily saying you shouldn't have them, but asking, where do they come from, and how comfortable are we with holding these norms? I think there was one scene where Gus went to, naked yoga, and kind of seeing a room full of men, with their junk out, so to speak, doing poses in front of each other. It does go out and ask this question that, obviously that might be an extreme version, and it's quite, interesting from an entertainment point of view, but it does show how uncomfortable men are with this vulnerability of being in a room naked, with someone else, or with the boys. I think there was an intervention at school where it started off with, I think someone painting, one of the students painting the other students, nails. And, it's like, this isn't what men do. This isn't what men do. And, in some sense, it's kind of like men don't talk about their feelings, that we don't talk about feeling depressed. It's just not something we do. And it's kind of like a huge blanket statement.
It is, and I'm really glad that you say what you said there in the beginning, because we absolutely didn't want to come across, and we had a big advisory committee of experts in lots of different areas that also informed the project, and we really didn't want to be about saying, masculinity is bad or there's something wrong with masculinity and it needs to change. We wanted it to be like just like you said, like a discussion about it, just opening up the topic and let's have a think about it. So I'm glad that that's how it came across, because that was absolutely what we wanted.
Yeah, because this is not an attack on masculinity. This is just saying, going out and holding really rigid, ideas about what masculinity is doesn't help. With that, we can define it a little bit more broadly. And so, being stoic isn't negative, but being rigidly stoic is. And so, I think for a lot of men, it might be useful to, go for a drive and clear your head, or, go for a fish and don't tell anyone about your problems and you work through it, because guess what? Probably a good 95% of problems you do work out by yourself. Uh, but, but, at the same time, there's that, 5% that you need some assistance with or help with. And particularly when it comes to feeling depressed or feeling that life is not worth living, that might be one of those times where we do put up our hand and say this one's worth talking about, because yes, I might be able to do it alone, and I have been able to do it previously, but the data says I can't as well. So, we're talking about a risky sort of space, and like a lot of things, I think erring on the side of caution and not going out and saying it's weak, or it's feminine, or the naming that we can put to it is not helpful, and we can reach out.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. It's about just being able to be flexible, isn't it? And to use, I have a whole set of approaches to life and to coping that you can draw on at any time. And it's about, I suppose, not being limited because you're a man, that you only get to choose, 3 strategies instead of 10. So, yeah, it's just about being able to be flexible. As you say, there's a time and a place for self-reliance, and then there's a time when it'd be nice to have another option to draw on.
And in some sense, this traditional idea of men have courage, and they're strong, and the like. I I would say there's a lot of courage and strength that comes from being vulnerable, because that in of itself, is a harder thing to go out and do. And the one thing that really impressed me is seeing, in particular, men who'd served our country, been at war, being able to have that conversation almost in the same way as their camaraderie brought them together to keep each other safe when on the battlefield. That same camaraderie, keeping each other safe, here where there isn't, war, and we're fighting a different type of war, one where we still need our mates and camaraderie, and we need to do this together.
Yeah, that was a great scene, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting actually, because in the people that in our study, they seem to fall into 2 camps. There were men that were saying to us, when they, in their responses to the question, saying to us that, yeah, reaching out for help is takes a lot of strength, and a lot of courage, and I realise that now. And so really sort of integrating help seeking and dealing with emotional problems into like that aspect of masculinity, as seeing it as something that takes strength and is actually a really masculine and tough thing to do. And then there were other men that were just saying to us, oh, this whole tough masculine thing, it's rubbish, and I'm just letting it all go, and I'm not going to be like that anymore. So sort of being prepared to open up to the softness, I guess, or just do away with calling it weak or strong or anything. So it was interesting to see the different ways that our participants were kind of integrating it into their views of masculinity and themselves.
Absolutely, that would question this idea of it's almost like putting away the word masculinity and not having to define it by anything, but rather saying what sort of person do you want to be, whether it's male, female, or or any category. Whether we go out and say you're a surgeon or a teacher or a librarian, it doesn't make a difference. You're a human first, and how do
Yeah,
we go out and
absolutely. Because obviously, a lot of women can be stoic and self-reliant as well. It's not just part of being a man.
And we don't want to forget about the other 25%. Yes, the staggering number is there, biased on the male side, but we don't want to forget that there's also 25% of women in this equation as well, who I would assume similarly probably do go out and suffer feeling alone, as though there's something about them.
Yeah, definitely. As you say, I'm sure it's reaching out to each other a bit more is something everyone could benefit from.
Anything that you think that we can integrate into our daily lives for listeners that may have a concern, or maybe they've noticed that whether it be a man in their life or a friend or someone female, even, because we shouldn't be just pushing it to one side. What can we do that's practical? What does the research tell us? And that obviously, I can't go out and put a documentary together, and but what can I do on a day to day? What can our listeners do?
Well, I guess it's about, like we were saying before, about just asking those extra questions and not being afraid to be a little bit more direct about it. And often people are quite relieved to have the direct question asked. So, but I understand that. I think a lot of the reasons people maybe don't ask those questions is because they don't know what to do if they get a difficult answer. But a lot of the times, just being that supportive friend and being the listener can be really very powerful. And it's not just about people who are suicidal. Obviously, we want to prevent suicide, but it's earlier down. It's way down the line when people have just had a crappy day or something. It's just about asking those questions and not being scared of asking them directly, like you said.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point. That this isn't about necessarily prevention at that very last sort of stage, but rather saying, "I'm here for you, mate, now, and I'm also here for you in 2 months and 9 months and in 5 years. That you're not alone, and you can come to me whenever." So we'll enjoy the good times, and also when it's tough, I'm here as well. It's more of a preventative social space rather than just reaching out at the very end, because you and I can miss those signals. We need to be proactive in having these conversations up front, even when people are feeling good.
Yeah, and also I think maybe about being a little bit more open about your own struggles, I think can often give people the comfort to feel like they can bring up something to you as well. So, maybe taking a little chance on revealing something a bit more about yourself and something that you might be struggling with, so making just checking yourself, are you keeping something to yourself that maybe you could share a little bit?
Well, one of those things that came out of the workshop that was facilitated in the school with the younger, sort of adolescents, was that situation where once one person was able to sort of step over that line, so to speak, and talk about their own pains, discomforts, their own fears, the others were almost immediately sympathetic, and in some sense could understand that person through themselves, because they obviously shared a similar thing. I thought it was fascinating that each of the the boys in the classroom had their own story to tell that was very close to their heart, and this is young boys, let alone those of us that are 30, 40, 50 years old. We're carrying a lot longer sort of life to have worries around.
Yeah. And when we asked people about, what parts of the documentary did you like the best, that section with the boys came up over and over. People just loved it because I think it was just so, like, when you see kids talking like that, you just can't ignore it and you can't help but be moved by it, can you? So, and yeah, a lot of people, men who viewed the documentary, told us about how moving that segment had been for them. Like, it had either perhaps reminded them of their own childhood, and or maybe made them sort of realize how silly it was, I guess, or how difficult it was to be in that situation. And some people talked about how, as a result of watching that, they had even started to change the way they'd interact with their own kids, about encouraging them to be more emotionally open, or not telling them off for crying and things like that.
I'm pretty sure I read a study before that looked at research with first year psychology students around suicidal thoughts, and if my memory serves me, that it was something like 70% of first year students reported suicidal thoughts, that they had already experienced them in their lifetime. So we're probably looking at an average age range of 19, 20 on an average. And so 70%, having already had these thoughts, it normalizes it. It means that, most of us by that age have at least had it run through our mind. It doesn't mean that we've necessarily had a plan or an intention to follow through, but, this is kind of, run of the mill experience for the vast majority of people, to at least have the thought race through their head at some stage, let alone for others who have maybe contemplated and you know, in some tragic circumstances, attempted.
Yeah, yeah. 'Cause there is a lot of stigma around suicide still, I think, and mental health generally, that might hold people back from talking openly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even the first step of being able to say I can reach out for help, and that it's not abnormal. That I don't have to be um, labeled with something, but rather as a human being, I'm going to go through some tough times. For me, being a psychologist, I'd be surprised if the vast majority of the population don't go through a so-called depressive sort of period where they feel kind of down and out and flat and helpless and hopeless. Thankfully for a lot of us, we get to see a brighter day, and it doesn't linger for as long. But to have that conversation, that we all feel it, that we've all experienced it, that in some way, shape, or form, even through life, there's going to be grief. We're going to be touched by the condition of being a human being.
Absolutely. And there's some great resources online too if people are concerned about somebody and weren't sure about how to approach them or how to help them. There's the Beyond Blue and Lifeline have great resources, and you can always, they both have helplines, of course, too, that you can call, and GPs are great first point of contact as well. So, yeah, there's certainly people that you can reach out to for yourself or if you're concerned about someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make sure that everyone's got those contact details, Lifeline is 13 11 14. That's 131114. And for Beyond Blue, I'll need to put that up. I don't have that here right in front of me, but once again, it's another resource. I think there's also a suicide prevention line as well, or my apologies, suicide callback. I think there's a suicide callback that you can look up as well, and a kids helpline for younger persons listening.
Yeah, and you could always call them as a concerned other as well for advice about how to help somebody.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's important. The concerned others that we don't have to wait for it to decline. That we can go out and, as a concerned other, go see a psychologist, go see a GP, speak to a loved one, a friend. How we can go out and get help is not defined through a professional service. I think we should reach out to wherever it is, because I think that one common theme that kept coming back was feeling alone, that I'm walking through this journey by
Mm,
myself, which I'd give the world to make sure that people knew that that wasn't the case. That
yeah,
there's others out there as well.
absolutely.
And I've just got that number for Beyond Blue. It's 1300 22 4636. 1300 22 4636. Fantastic resources there. Any other books or resources that you can think of that might be
Oh,
helpful, or that you think is a good starting point, above and beyond? Obviously, these national lines are incredible in what they do, and particularly Lifeline.
well, there's men's line as well, which is specific for men, of course. And yeah, so I mean, they provide a fantastic service and do a lot of work around, general support for men, especially around relationships and whatnot. So they're a great helpline as well. I don't know their number off the top of my head.
It's 1300 789978. It really shows that there's so many possible avenues that we can go out and encourage men around Australia to reach out to, and not feel ashamed, not feel stigmatized, labeled, but being a man and reaching out is part of that masculine side as well. Let's redefine it rather than hold to these old traditional norms.
Yeah, and the Movember Foundation, who funded this project and the Man Up documentary, they continue to do some really great work in this space as well, and have had some what do they have, like date night with a mate, and had some really fun initiatives that have come out of this as well. So they're continually working to, I suppose, help men make connections.
Yeah, fantastic. Dr. Kylie King, I really appreciate having you on the Better Thinking podcast, and obviously for all your amazing work, particularly as a advisory panel, for the Man Up podcast. And I hope that you're able to be given a lot more resources to devote to this space. I think men in particular, but not forgetting women as well. In this preventative space around suicidality, I think it's affected all of us, and it's touched us at some level. I hope that in Australia and around the world we can do a better job, and I think this is a fantastic place to start from, of breaking down those barriers and redefining what does it mean to be masculine. So thank you for coming, and it's been absolutely fantastic speaking.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for your time and for your interest in the topic.
And if anyone wants to get in touch with you, in terms of whether it be research or find out more, is there a way that they can go out and contact you or the university?
Yeah, absolutely. Always contactable at the university. My email address is k.king@unimelb.edu.au. Always happy to hear from people.
Fantastic. Well, thanks again, and I'm sure with this great starting point, along with the other resources and programs going on, we'll be able to do a better job in changing these norms, and a better future for our boys. Young boys growing up in today's age, and to go out and say for maybe us a little bit older folk, that we can buck those trends and norms, and do it better.